school, 45 years after leaving school, I'm finding that a number of us who were in school are really reconnecting in quite a deep way. And it's that common ground, that shared experience of being at Doon, which is allowing us to do that. But when I reflect back on the young boy of 5.5, 6, who joined Welham Boys, through to the boy who left Doon at about 16, I actually have quite a lot of compassion for him. I look at him and I think, yes, there were happy moments, but there were a lot of dark moments. There was a lot of loneliness, feelings of isolation sometimes, bullying, stress. And when I look back on that young boy, I think he didn't know how to handle his emotions. In fact, this sort of boys' boarding school had in some ways made him suppress his emotions, in a way sort of dumb down his emotions, even mute his emotions. And now, many years later, I am interested in these things, and I find that I found techniques or methods to look at my emotions, handle them, and care for myself, have compassion for myself. And I think this is something which should be taught in all schools. But I thought I'll share one of those practices that may be helpful to you. I don't know, school now 40 years later is slightly different, but still those issues of how to handle emotions, how to not be stressed. I know there's a lot of stress nowadays for young people trying to apply for colleges, what their future careers will be. So how do we lessen that stress? How do we lessen that emotional angst? So what I've learned is really to come back to the present moment. This is something which I've got from my Zen training. I find that the way to come back to myself in this moment is really to come back to my breath. My body is here, but my mind may be going all over the place. So as soon as I make my mind a breathing mind, I can help my body and mind come back into the present. And when I come back into the present, then I have some control of how to respond to anything that may be happening outside of me or inside of me. Whether it's an emotion arising, or whether it's somebody saying something hurtful to me, I actually can breathe and actually absorb to some degree, or create at least a gap between the external stimuli and my reaction or response. And I use something like a bell. And this bell, I call a bell of mindfulness. So I'm going to I'm going to sound this bell, and I use this bell every day for my meditation, and I come back to myself using the sound of the bell. So when I invite the sound of the bell, you can close your eyes if you want, and I would suggest that you just follow 3 breaths. So wherever you're sitting, just relax your shoulders, sit comfortably in your seats, and just listen to the sound of the bell, and just come back to your in-breath and your out-breath. In-breath and out-breath. And this sort of invitation to the bell can be done in many ways. You don't always need a bell. In fact, my telephone, every time my telephone rings, I call it telephone meditation. I let my phone ring at least 3 times. And with the first ring, I stop. I stop what I'm doing. I try and stop my thinking. And then with the second bell, I come back to my breath, which helps me come back into the present moment. And with the third ring, I smile. And if somebody's ringing me, my wife is ringing me, my children are ringing me, my friends are ringing me, I'm much more present for them with that phone. And also the phone has helped me to come back into that present moment. So it's not just a tool of communication, which is great, but it's definitely not it's not an irritation for me. If a phone rings right now in the audience, I'll just smile. It's my practice, you know. It's a bit like a Pavlovian dog, you know. When I hear a bell, I stop. But it was interesting, when I was in school, the bell had a very different connotation. When I heard the bell, I was anxious. I would run. I was late for school. I was something. And the bell became actually a bit of a terror for me rather than something which was aiding me. And now, coming back as an old boy of the school, I find whenever the bell rings, I find it so pleasant. I stop. And I become attentive to the trees, to the wonderful surroundings that I never touched as a student. So I think just shifting your, and if you are late for class, then at least hear the sound of the bell, come back to yourself and know you're rushing and you're present with that. But many bells ring when you're just sitting. Just pause and just come back to yourself. In that moment, you can really touch the miracle of whatever's around you, whatever's happening in you, and also understand how your emotions are, how to let that start working through you in a sort of compassionate way. But I thought I'd just share some sort of wake-up moments in the last few years of my life and how they've really affected me where I am today. So I'm 60, so I left school more than 40 years ago. But I remember in school there was a man who came. He came to our physics class, and he gave a talk, and he said, he used to buy amplifiers, musical amplifiers, which would come in boxes, and he'd open them up and make sculptures out of them. And I thought, wow, that's really literally out of the box thinking. And I thought, you can make a living through doing something quite counterintuitive in a sort of way. It is a small wake-up moment, but the bigger wake-up moments, fast forward to when I'm 23, I'm in England, I have a corporate job. Fortunately, there was a lot of luck on my side. I landed a very good job. I was earning more than my parents put together after working all their lives. Fancy house, and then driving a sports car, an MG sports car, my girlfriend, all the right trappings. And the last thing I remember is the speedometer, 110 miles an hour, which is about 177 kilometers an hour, and poof, I'm gone. And this car smashed. The next thing I remember is I'm getting up in hospital. And when I'm waking up in hospital, I have this thing, I'm alive. I'm actually alive. It's sort of quite a basic thinking, but I didn't probably expect it. And that preciousness of life hit me. And I also realized a few things while I was reflecting the next few days in bed, was that my main motivation for my work will not be money, which it had become. It was actually that my motto was very much make a lot of money quick. And I said, that is not my deal. And I'd like to make my career based on my ideal of compassion and lead a much simpler life. And it was interesting because I'd already suffered myself and I'd seen suffering, but I hadn't done much about it. And I thought I'd just die. I died. So this was really a second chance for me. I'd been working in the shoe industry. I was working in an English company, Clark's. I used to buy shoes from Agra. I'd see the Jata Dalit shoe workers working really with the skill of an eye doctor on the shoemaking and earning less than what I would spend. They'd earn in a week less than what I'd spend in a hotel room for one night. In fact, I moved out of my hotel room and started staying with them just to understand their lives. And then when I went to England also, I got beaten up 3 times. Somebody spat on my face, somebody beat me up for my color. And that odd sort of suffering that I had actually was helpful to me to empathize with the economic and other sort of discrimination that the Dalits were feeling. And then I decided that I really need to make some changes. I left my job. I want to understand why poor people poor, why a rich country is rich, what is the relationship. And I went back to university to study development studies and political economics. And I became a political activist. And I became a real halla bol activist, working with very good people, but really confronting the police, confronting the army in the case in England, and going to jail, organizing dharnas. This is a sort of activist politics. And one day I remember, in the midst of one of our programs, I sort of just burnt out. I broke down. And I went to a friend's room and I lay down on the ground and I'd had it. I really didn't know how to look after myself. Here I was trying to make the world a better place, but really not knowing how to look after myself. And so I sort of realized that I was part of the problem. My aggression, my anger was part of the problem. And so I realized I better become peace or be peace rather than just fight for peace. And that was a long journey. Partly I carried on my work with social development, with artisans, volunteers, the UN, the World Bank. But on the other side, my path took me on a spiritual journey. And I went to many, many traditions, Sufis, Quakers. And slowly I found that I was getting more and more interested in Buddhism. It was actually a sutra I read called the Kalama Sutra, where the Kalama is the tribe which comes to Buddha and says, this teacher says this teacher says this teacher says this. What is the right teaching? And the Buddha says, don't believe teachers, don't believe me, you don't believe your elders, your texts, but you try the practice. And if it gives you a sense of well-being, it gives well-being to others around you, then it is a good practice. And if it doesn't cause suffering to you and others, it is not a good practice. And I thought, eminently sensible practice. And this sort of, I got more and more interested in Buddhism. I started meeting teachers from Burma, from Korea, Japan. And then I was at a retreat where there was a teacher called Thich Nhat Hanh who was leading a retreat for artists. And on the second day of the retreat, he was teaching walking meditation. And it's another one of those wonderful techniques where you just walk, but you're really attentive to where you're walking. And you're walking to walk, not to get somewhere. And so this practice of just breathing in and really imprinting your peacefulness on the earth. And then pausing, looking at the beautiful, this is in the Los Padres Mountains in California. So I was looking out at the mountains there. And what struck me at that moment, that sort of wake-up moment for me was, I really touched peace. For the first time in my life, I really experienced peace, not as a concept, not as an idea, but viscerally in my body. I mean, it was one of those sort of moments where you lose the sense of yourself and the identification of yourself. And it was a combination of intense happiness, contentment, a sort of rapture in a sort of way, but in a very calm way. And I realized I could do this. And this same teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, who then became my teacher after that, he asked me to organize a pilgrimage for him to the sites associated with the Buddha in India, in Bihar and UP. So I did that the next year with him, and it was very nice because I went walking with him literally, and he held me by the hand, and he brought alive the Buddha as a human being. And for me, being brought up in India, so Buddha was a slightly deific, slightly superhuman type guy. And suddenly I realized this man had the same angst. He could have gone to any career, anything, he could have done anything. And he chose a career of awakening, a career of enlightenment, a career of compassion that he could help others. And that really had a strong effect on me. And then Thich Nhat Hanh said, why don't you do this pilgrimage every year? So for the last 30 years, I go on pilgrimage every year. And I learn the life of this man and how he would have made decisions and how he really built a community to help this type of collective awakening. I think what I've also found in the last few years, and this comes back to the whole problem of handling emotions when I was young, is to try and bring what I call mindfulness into school education. I think since you're a school audience, I felt this is something which now is being recognized as something which is important for mind training, even for things like cognitive awareness, emotional intelligence. But there are basic techniques of how to really understand your mind, calm your mind, and so in fact the first workshop for this was done at the DoonSchool in the world by this community in 2008, and we've done it at Welham Boys, at Woodstock, and I feel that this is a sort of, and sometimes I say, people say, why is it not taught? And we say, because the teachers don't know how to do it. The teachers were never taught to do this. But now more and more, we are realizing that these sort of softer skills of understanding our mind and this inner mind, understanding your inner heart and mind is very important, not just for happiness and peace, but actually for creating good community in schools. And schools are places where we can build community and build a family. And these sort of practices allow us, when somebody does walking meditation, for example, he is a bell of mindfulness, or she is a bell of mindfulness for everyone else. When you eat in mindfulness, with that full awareness that this food you're eating is a gift of the cosmos, you allow that to happen to other people too. So these sort of wake-up moments that have happened, the sort of thinking out of the box, the feeling of taking compassion as my ideal, or the ideal of compassion as my career option, living more simply, realizing that peace is a path, peace is a way, and also realizing that enlightenment can be a great practice and a great awakening. And I feel that as we go into this, to look at this as the potential of a collective awakening rather than just an individual awakening.